company away from me. I sat at the head of a table I built with my own 2 hands, and I kept my mouth shut. 9 people voted. Only one of them looked me in the eye when he did it, the boy I'd raised like a son. Trent. My hand was in my coat pocket the whole time, wrapped around a folded index card I'd carried for 17 years. A card with his handwriting on it. Something nobody in that room knew existed. Something that meant nothing to anyone but me. And here's the thing. I let them think they'd won. My name is Calvin Reese. Most people who've known me longer than a week just call me Cal. I'm 62 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, I was the founder and chairman of Reese Millwork, the custom cabinet and architectural woodworking company I started in a rented garage back in 1988 with $400 and a table saw I bought used off a man named Petey. By last year, we ran 110,000 square feet of plant floor out on Route 9, outside Ashford, and we employed 122 people. I knew every one of their names. I knew which ones had a kid heading to college and which ones were fighting to keep a marriage together. That was the whole point. That was the life. I'm not a big talker. Never have been. I'm the kind of man people underestimate, and I learned a long time ago to let them. I still had sawdust in my truck the morning they voted me out. I still keep every receipt I've ever been handed. Every single one, in shoeboxes, going back 40 years, because my father did the same, and he used to say a man who keeps his records never has to raise his voice to be believed. Every night before bed, I write one line in a little green ledger. Just one. The date, and one true thing that happened that day. Some men pray. I write it down. I need you to understand who Trent was to me, or none of the rest of this will land the way it should. I had a son, Daniel, Danny. He was 22 years old when a man ran a red light on Highway 4 in the rain and took him from us in about the time it takes to blink. That was 2006. I don't talk about it much. My wife, Marion, and I, we didn't so much survive that year as get carried through it. 2 years later, a skinny 19-year-old kid walked into my shop looking for work sweeping floors. Torn boots. A duffel bag that held everything he owned. Sharp as a tack and hungry in a way that had nothing to do with food. And when he looked up at me and stuck out his hand and said, "Mr. Reese, I'll outwork anybody you've got," something in my chest just cracked open. His name was Trent Kessler. And God help me, I loved him like he was mine. I taught him everything. Not just the wood, how to read a joint, how to tell a client no without losing them, how to make payroll in a bad month without letting the guys on the floor see you sweat. I brought him up from the sweep, to the shop, to the office, to the boardroom. I gave him equity when he had nothing to trade for it but promise. 17 years. A 17-year friendship that I would have bet my house on. That I did, in a way, bet my house on. And when the day came that I felt old and tired and wanted to slow down, there was only one man on this earth I trusted to hand the keys to. You can already see where this is going. But I promise you, you can't see the half of it. Real quick, if the story's already got its hooks in you, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and give the video a like. It's a small thing, and it means more than you know. Alright, where was I? The first thing I noticed was a number that didn't fit. It was a supplier invoice, hardwood veneer from a mill in Tennessee we'd used for 12 years. The price per sheet had jumped almost 40%, and yet the line item on our internal report showed our margins had improved that quarter. Now, I built this company with a pencil and a legal pad before I ever trusted a computer, and I can tell you, those two things cannot both be true. When your cost goes up and your reported profit goes up at the same time, and nobody can explain why, something didn't add up. My father had a phrase for that feeling. He called it smelling a rat. I mentioned it to Trent over coffee, just casual. I said, "Son, walk me through the Tennessee numbers. I'm getting old, and I can't make them square." And Trent, smooth as ever, that easy grin. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Cal, you built the ship. Let me steer it for a while. You've earned the rest." And he laughed, and I let it go. I shouldn't have let it go. Because 2 weeks later, I got a certified letter at my home. Not a call. Not a knock on my door from the man I'd raised. A letter from a law firm I'd never heard of, informing me that a special meeting of the board of Reese Millwork had been scheduled, and that the agenda included, and I'm quoting the code language exactly as it sat there on that paper, a resolution regarding the composition of the board and the office of the chairman. I sat at my kitchen table and read it 4 times. Marion came in and saw my face and set down the dish towel and said, "Cal, what is it?" And I couldn't answer her. Because the writing was on the wall, and I knew it, and I didn't want to say it out loud in my own kitchen where Danny used to do his homework. I did the only thing I know how to do when the ground moves under me. I went to my records. I have a filing cabinet in my basement, gray steel, 4 drawers, that holds a copy of every meaningful document this company ever generated, and I pulled the operating agreement. And I sat down under a bare bulb and I read all 51 pages, slow, the way you read a will. And that's when I found the first real problem. Somewhere in the last 18 months, without my ever being told, our ownership had been diluted. New shares issued. My controlling stake, the 51% I'd held for the life of this company, had quietly slipped to 38. I still can't tell you the exact night my hands started to shake reading it, but I know it was down there in that basement. And here's the part that made my blood run cold. The shares hadn't just vanished into thin air. They'd gone somewhere. They'd been sold to an outside firm, a private capital group called Sterling Point, and the paperwork authorizing it carried a signature at the bottom that made me put both hands flat on the table to steady myself. It was mine, my signature, on a document I had never in my life seen. Now, I want to be careful here because I'm not a man who jumps to the worst thought first. So I told myself, all right, Cal, maybe you signed a stack of things. Maybe it was buried in a folder. You're 62. Your memory isn't what it was. That's what I told myself. But I don't sign what I don't read. I have never in 40 years signed what I didn't read. My father wouldn't allow it, and neither would I. So there were only two possibilities. Either I had lost my own mind, or somebody had forged the founder of this company right out of his own house. And the only man on earth who knew my signature well enough, who'd watched me sign 1,000 times, who had the access and the reason and the nerve, was the boy I'd taught to sign his own name on a company check. I sat in that basement a long time, and after a while, without even deciding to, I reached into my coat and took out the folded index card I've carried in my wallet since 2011. Trent's handwriting. 7 words on the front, and under them, in the corner, a number and a date I never once understood in all those years. I'd always read that card as the sweetest thing anybody ever gave me. But that night, for the very first time, I wondered if it was something else entirely. Part 2. I didn't decode the card that night. I want to be honest with you about that because it would make a better story to say I did, that I sat in that basement and cracked it open like a safe. I didn't. I turned it over in my fingers under that bare bulb until my coffee went cold upstairs, and all I could feel was the shape of a betrayal I didn't yet have the edges of. So I put the card back in my wallet, next to my license, where it's written for 17 years, and I went to bed, and I lay there next to Marion in the dark, and I made myself a promise instead. I promised myself I would not say one word to one soul until I knew everything. Because here's what I'd figured out in that basement, the one thing that gave me a place to stand. If a man forges your name to steal your company, he has just handed you a crime, and a crime leaves a trail. And nobody on God's green earth is better at following a paper trail than a man who's kept every receipt for 40 years. They thought they were taking a tired old founder out to pasture. What they were actually doing was picking a fight with the one kind of man you should never pick it with, a patient one. The special meeting was set for a Tuesday, 3 weeks out, and I did something in those 3 weeks that I think surprised the both of them, Trent and whoever was pulling the strings at Sterling Point. I did nothing they could see anyway. I came in late and left early. I let Trent run the floor. I let him sit at the head of the table in the Thursday production meeting while I took a chair off to the side, and I watched him do it, and I smiled at him like a proud father, and it nearly killed me. Because every time he grinned at me across that room, I saw the 19-year-old in the torn boots, and I had to hold 2 men in my head at once, the boy I'd loved and the man who'd forged my hand, and I couldn't yet make them the same person. That's the thing nobody tells you about being betrayed by your own. It doesn't come in like a wolf. It comes in wearing the face you taught to smile. But quietly, after hours, in that basement with the door shut, I went to work. I started with the one number that had bothered me from the start, the Tennessee Veneer. And I want to slow down here, because this is where the floor gave out under me a second time. I called the mill directly. Not the office line. I called Earl Haddon, who runs the place, a man I've known 20 years, a man who stood in my shop and eaten Marion's pot roast at my own table. And I asked him plain, "What's Reese Millwork been paying you a sheet this past year?" And Earl went quiet, and then Earl said, "Cal, you fellas stopped buying from us 14 months ago." 14 months. We hadn't bought a single sheet of veneer from Earl Haddon's mill in over a year, and yet there were invoices. I'd held them in my own hands, with his company's letterhead on them, running through our books at a 40% markup, month after month after month. Somebody had taken a real supplier we'd used for over a decade, a name that would never raise a flag because it belonged there, and they'd built a ghost out of it. Fake invoices. Real money going out the door. And the money wasn't going to Tennessee. I asked Earl to do me one favor and keep our talk between us, and that good man said, "Cal, whatever's going on up there, you call me if you need a witness." I wrote his name in my green ledger that night, just his name, Earl Haddon, a friend. Now, if you're still with me and the story's getting under your skin, a like and a subscribe would honestly mean the world to me. All right, back to it. Here's what I understood now, standing in that basement with the phone still warm in my hand. This wasn't Trent wanting to run the company. If he'd wanted the company, all he had to do was ask me. I'd been looking for a reason to hand him the keys. No, you don't forge a man's signature and dilute his shares and invent a phantom supplier just to take the chairman's office. You do all of that when you need to move money out of a company fast and quiet, and you need the founder gone before he starts asking where it went. Trent wasn't building an empire. Trent was covering a hole, a big one, and he was throwing me under the bus to do it, but I still didn't know why. What does a man who has everything I gave him need to steal for? And that question, the why-is the one that kept me up nights, because I knew Trent, or I thought I did. And the Trent I knew didn't gamble, didn't chase women, didn't live above his means. He drove a 5-year-old truck, he packed his own lunch. That was part of why I trusted him. He had my habits. So where was the money going? Let me ask you something, and I mean it. I read every comment on these. If it were you sitting in that basement, 3 weeks out from a board meeting that's going to strip you of the thing you built your whole life, would you have shown your hand? Or would you have kept quiet and let them think you were beaten? Tell me in the comments what you'd have done. I want to know. Because what I did next, some of you are going to say was foolish. I called Trent, and I invited him to dinner. Just the two of us, I said. The old steakhouse on Route 9, the one where I took him the first time he ever closed a real client, back when he was 20 and didn't own a jacket and I lent him one of mine that swallowed him whole. I told him I wanted to talk about the future. And I heard something in his voice when he said yes, a half-second pause, the kind you'd never catch unless you'd spent 17 years learning the sound of a man. And I knew he was afraid, not of me, of what I might know. We sat in the same corner booth. He ordered a ribeye. I ordered what I always order, a cup of black coffee, nothing else. He noticed. He always noticed. He said, "You're not eating, Cal?" And I said, "I ate at home." Marion made a roast. I hadn't. I just wanted my hands and my head clear, and I let him talk. I've learned that if you stay quiet long enough, a nervous man will fill the silence with the very thing he came to hide. So I counted. That's a habit of mine. When a silence falls, I count the seconds of it in my head, because most men can't stand past 7. Trent made it to 4. "Cal," he said, turning his water glass in a slow circle, "I know the board thing looks bad, the letter and all, but I need you to trust me. There's a version of this where you come out of it just fine. Better than fine. I've got it handled. I always have. I've got it handled." The same 3 words he'd used at every hard moment for 17 years. And for the first time, sitting across from him, I heard them for what they'd maybe always been. Not a promise to me. A warning to himself. I nodded. I told him I trusted him. God forgive me. I looked that boy in the eye and I lied, because he had lied to me first, and I needed 30 more minutes of him thinking I was beaten. And near the end, when the plates were cleared and he thought the hard part was over, he did the thing that changed everything. He pulled out his phone to show me a photo, his daughter's birthday, my own goddaughter, and my heart twisted looking at her. And while he was scrolling, a message came in and lit up the top of his screen. Just a banner, there and gone in 2 seconds. But I read fast. 40 years of reading small print off invoices, you read fast. The name on it was Sterling Point, and the message, the piece I caught before it vanished, said 7 words that turned my blood to ice water right there in that booth. Reese has to sign by Friday or. And then it was gone. And Trent slid the phone back in his pocket, smiling, none the wiser, as Reese has to sign by Friday. But I'd already been voted out on paper. My shares were already gone. There was nothing left for me to sign. Unless there was one more thing they still needed from me. One last signature. And whatever it was worth so much to them that a man was texting my protege to get it done by Friday, 3 days before a board meeting where I was supposed to have no power left at all. A hearty 3. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table until the sky went gray, with a legal pad and my green ledger and a fresh pot of coffee going cold beside me, and I worked the problem the only way I know how, backwards. If the man needs one more signature from someone he's already stripped of every share, then that signature isn't about ownership. It's about something ownership can't touch. And I sat there in the dark and I asked myself, what did I still control that Trent and Sterling Point, for all their lawyers and their forged paper, could not reach without me? And a little before 6 in the morning, I found it. The land. The 110,000 square foot plant out on Route 9, the ground it sits on, that had never belonged to Reese Millwork. Not the company. It belonged to me. Personally. I'd bought that parcel back in 1994 with money I scraped together, and when we outgrew the garage, I built the plant on it and leased it back to my own company for $1 a year, because that's the kind of thing an accountant tells you to do, and I'd been my own accountant since the beginning. Everybody who'd worked there 20 years just thought the land came with the company. It didn't. It was mine, and my name. Free and clear. You cannot forge a man's way out of a deed. A dilution of shares you can bury in a stack of paperwork. A real estate transfer needs the actual owner, in person, in front of a notary, with a pen and a witness. That was the one door Trent couldn't pick. That was the signature the man from Sterling Point needed by Friday. They didn't want my company. They'd already taken that. They wanted the ground under it. Because whatever hole Trent had been shoveling money into for 14 months, it had gotten deep enough that the only thing left big enough to fill it was the 12 acres and the building sitting on it. And that's when the shape of the whole thing finally turned over in my mind, and I understood I'd had it backwards from the start. Trent wasn't the one running this. A boy doesn't invent a phantom veneer supplier and a private capital group out of thin air. Somebody had gotten to Trent, somebody had a hook in him. And I'd spent 3 weeks so wounded by the boy's betrayal that I'd never once asked the question a careful man should always ask first. Who's standing behind him? Look, I want to say something here, and I mean it. If you've got a story like this in your own life, somebody you raised or trusted who turned on you, I'd like to hear it. Drop it in the comments below, because I read every single one, and I promise you're not alone in it. And if this one's keeping you here, a like and a subscribe would mean a great deal to me. Now, let me tell you about the man behind the curtain. His name was Marcus Fane. And I'd shaken his hand exactly once. It was maybe 2 years back, at a Chamber of Commerce dinner in Ashford, one of those rubber chicken affairs I only go to because Marion says a man ought to be seen by the town that feeds him. Trent had introduced us. Cal, this is Marcus. He's in finance. He's been giving me some real sharp advice. Sharp advice. Smooth fella, good suit, a watch that costs more than my truck, a handshake like a closing door. And I remember thinking, standing there with my cheap coffee, this is not our kind of people. I didn't say it. I just filed it away, the way I file everything. But I never connected him to the numbers, because why would I? He was just a name at a dinner. Marcus Fane was Sterling Point. And Marcus Fane, it turned out, had found in my Trent the one thing every con man in the world is hunting for, a good, hungry young man carrying a secret shame he'd do anything to keep buried. I didn't know the shame yet. That came later, and it broke my heart worse than any of the money did. But I knew now that the boy hadn't woken up one day and decided to rob the man who raised him. He'd been walked into it, one small compromise at a time, by a professional, until he was in so deep that betraying me was the only bridge left standing. That doesn't make it right. I want to be clear about that. A man is responsible for the door he chooses to walk through. But it does make it human. And a human trap you can spring. A monster you just run from. Trent wasn't a monster. He was a scared man in a suit he'd bought with stolen money, and scared men make mistakes. So I decided to give him room to make one. Here's what I did. I let it get to Wednesday, 2 days before their Friday deadline, and then I let word reach Trent casual, through my secretary Donna, who'd been with me 30 years and hated Marcus Fane on sight the one time she met him, that I'd come around, that I understood the company had moved on, that I was tired, that I was ready to sign whatever needed signing to make a clean break and enjoy my retirement. That I just wanted it over. You should have seen how fast the meeting got set up. Thursday afternoon, a conference room in a glass building downtown I'd never set foot in, Sterling Point's floor. And I want you to picture me walking in there, 62 years old, my good suit, the one I wear to funerals, because that felt about right. Sawdust probably still in the cuffs. And I've got my old leather folio under my arm, the one I've carried to every important meeting for 30 years. And everybody in that room looked at that scuffed old thing and at me, and I could see them all thinking the same comfortable thought. Poor old Cal, he's finally beaten. Marcus Fane was there, at the head of the table of course, in a chair that probably cost 4 figures. And Trent was there, and he wouldn't look at me, kept his eyes down on his own hands, and I thought, good, keep them there, son. And there was a lawyer and a notary they brought in, a nervous young woman with a stamp, and the deed transfer sitting in the middle of that long table like a body at a viewing. 12 acres and everything on it, ready for my signature, to be handed to Sterling Point for $1 and other good and valuable consideration. $1. For the ground I bought 30 years ago. They didn't even have the decency to pretend it was a real number. Marcus Fane did most of the talking. Smooth, kind, condescending in that way that men like him think reads as warm. He told me I'd built something wonderful, and now it was time to let the next generation carry it. That there was no shame in stepping back. That they'd see to it I was taken care of. He kept using that phrase. Taken care of .os. Like I was a horse with a bad leg. And I let him talk. I counted the silences. I sipped the bad coffee they gave me. And when he finally slid the deed across the table and held out a heavy silver pen and said, "Whenever you're ready, Cal," I looked at that pen and I looked at Trent, who finally raised his eyes to mine, and I reached into my leather folio, but I didn't take out a pen. I took out a single sheet of paper and I laid it on top of their deed, face up, so everybody at that table could read it. And I watched the color drain out of Marcus Fane's face one shade at a time, like water going out of a sink. Because it wasn't the deed anymore they were looking at. It was a photocopy of an invoice. From a mill in Tennessee, for veneer that was never bought, and clipped to the corner of it was a sticky note in my own blocky handwriting that said just one thing, Earl Haddon says hello, .ec part 4. Nobody said a word for a long moment, and I counted it. I counted it the way I count every silence, and I want you to know that this one, the longest, sweetest silence of my whole life. This one ran to 11 full seconds before Marcus Vane found his voice. 11. I'd never seen a man make it past 7. But then, Marcus Vane had a great deal riding on staying calm, and it still wasn't enough. Cal, he said, and the warmth was gone out of him now. That easy country club warmth just switched off like a lamp. I don't know what you think that is. You know exactly what it is, I said. Quiet. I didn't raise my voice. My father was right about that. A man who keeps his records never has to. It's one of 41 of them. 14 months of invoices, from a supplier my company stopped using before any of this started, run through our books at a markup, for a total of $340,000. I let that number sit on the table next to their dollar deed. That money didn't go to Tennessee. Earl Haddon never saw a dime of it. So I've been asking myself all week, where did $340,000 go? And here's the thing, I already knew. I'd known since the night before. But there's a difference between knowing a thing and saying it out loud in a room, and I wanted Trent to be the one who broke, not Vane. Vane I didn't care about. Vane was a stranger in a good suit. I wanted the boy. Because, as long as Trent sat there frozen with his eyes down, there was still a version of this where he was just a witness to his own drowning. The second he spoke, he'd have to choose which side of the table he was on. So I looked right at him, and I said the only thing I had left that could reach him. I said, Danny would have been 40 this year. That's all. Just that. And Trent Kessler put his face in his hands, at the head of a conference table on the top floor of a glass building, in front of a lawyer and a notary and the man who'd bought his soul on installment. And he broke. Now, before I tell you what came out of him, let me pull back for just a second, because if you're new here and this story's had a hold on you, do me the kindness of hitting subscribe and giving it a like. It's the whole way a channel like this keeps its doors open. All right. Back into that room. What came out of Trent once it started came out all at once, the way water comes through a crack in a dam that's been holding too long, and it was worse than money. It's always worse than money. 8 years ago, back when I still thought of him as a young man just finding his feet, Trent had made a bad investment, not gambling, not the things I'd braced myself for. He'd sunk his savings into a business a friend was starting, co-signed a loan for it, put his name on the line the way a loyal, trusting man does. And the friend had run off, and the business had died, and Trent had been left holding a debt with his signature on it that he could not possibly pay on the salary of a shop foreman. He was drowning, quietly. The way I'd taught him, never let the guys on the floor see you sweat. He'd learned that lesson too well. He learned it so well he never came to me, and that's the part that I'll carry to my grave, the part that's my share of this. Because if that boy had walked into my office 8 years ago and said, Cal, I'm in trouble, I need help, I would have written the check before he finished the sentence, without a second thought. He knew that, and his pride wouldn't let him. That pride is the crack that Marcus Vane crawled into. Vane found him at his lowest. I still don't know exactly how, whether he came sniffing around the way those men do, or whether Trent, desperate, reached out for a lifeline and grabbed a snake, but Vane offered to make the debt go away. And in return, all Trent had to do was help him with a little restructuring at a woodworking company Vane had taken an interest in. Just move some numbers. Just look the other way on a supplier account. Just one small thing, and then one more small thing, and then a slightly bigger thing, until the day came when the only way to keep the whole tower from falling on his head was to forge his own mentor's name and vote him off his own board. The chickens had come home to roost, but they hadn't come home to Trent's house. Not yet. That was still to come. I want to say something to you here, and I want you to hear me because I've thought about it a great deal since. Sitting in that room, watching that boy come apart, I did not feel triumphant. I know how this story is supposed to go. The old man springs the trap, the villain crumbles, and you cheer. But I didn't cheer. I looked at Trent Kessler with his face in his hands, and I saw the 19-year-old in the torn boots who told me he'd outwork anybody I had, and my heart broke clean in two. Because I understood, finally, that I hadn't lost my son twice. I'd almost lost him twice, and there might still be a way to only lose him once. That's when Marcus Vane made his mistake. He stood up. He buttoned his expensive jacket, cool as you please, and he looked down at me. At the old man with sawdust in his cuffs and one photocopied invoice, and he decided I was still bluffing. He decided that a scuffed leather folio and a sticky note couldn't possibly be more than a scared old man's last card. And men like Marcus Vane, when they think they've measured you and found you small, they can't help themselves. They get careless. They tell you exactly who they are. You've got one invoice and a phone call from some backwoods lumberman, he said, and he actually smiled. You think that's anything? I've got a floor of lawyers who'll bury you in paper until you're dead, Cal. Literally. You're 62? You want to spend what you've got left in a courtroom against me? He leaned down close so only our end of the table could hear it, and this is the part I'd been waiting 3 weeks for. Sign the deed, take your dollar and your dignity, and go home. Or I promise you, we will pull this company apart and every one of those 120 people you love so much will be out of work by Christmas. That's not a threat. That's just what happens next. Their families are your responsibility now, old man, not mine." He straightened up, satisfied, sure he'd broken me, and I reached back into my leather folio one more time. And I took out a small black digital recorder, the kind you can buy at any office supply store for $30, the kind an old man who doesn't trust computers might carry, and I set it on the table, and I let him see the little red light that had been on the whole time. "Marcus," I said, "I'm an old man. My hearing's not what it was. Would you mind saying that last part again?" The part about the 120 families. I want to be sure I got it. Part 5, I have watched a lot of men lose a lot of things in 40 years of business. I've watched men lose deals, lose companies, lose their nerve at the worst possible second. But I had never, until that Thursday afternoon, watched a man lose the thing that men like Marcus Vane guard above everything else. The certainty that he was the smartest person in the room. It went out of his face all at once. And what was left underneath it, when the smart went out, was not much. Just a middle-aged man in an expensive jacket who'd said too much to the wrong old man. The lawyer they'd brought, the one who was supposed to bury me in paper? That lawyer stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the glass wall, and he said the 6 words that every lawyer says when the ground opens up under his client. "I need a moment with my client." And Marcus Vane snapped at him to sit down, which is exactly the wrong thing to do, and I knew right then that whatever else happened, these two were finished with each other. There's no loyalty on that side of the table. There never is. That's the difference between them and us, and Vane was about to learn it the hard way. I didn't gloat. I want you to know that. I didn't say one more word to Vane than I had to. I just picked up my recorder, and I picked up my one photocopied invoice off the top of their deed, and I left the deed sitting right there unsigned, and I closed my scuffed old leather folio and I stood up. My knees cracked when I did. They always do now. And in that silent room it sounded like 2 gunshots. And I said to the room, not to any one man, "I'll be at the courthouse Monday morning at 9. Anyone who wants to get ahead of this had better be there before me." And then I looked at Trent, one last time. And I said, quiet, just for him, "You've got a choice to make, son. You've got the whole weekend to make it. You know where I live. You've always known where I live." And I walked out. Before I tell you about the weekend, because everything turned on that weekend, let me ask you something, because I've wondered about it ever since, and I'd truly like to know what you think. If a man betrayed you the way Trent betrayed me, forged your name, voted you off the thing you spent your life building, but you knew he'd been cornered into it, cornered by someone worse, would you give him a door back, or would you let him go down with the man who used him? There's no wrong answer. I've heard good people come down hard on both sides. Tell me in the comments what you would have done. I read everyone, and I mean that. Now, the weekend. I did not sleep Friday, and I did not sleep Saturday. And Marion, who has been married to me for 39 years and can read me like her own handwriting, she didn't push. She just kept the coffee coming and sat with me in the quiet. Around midnight Saturday, she put her hand over mine on the kitchen table, and she said, "Whatever he does, Cal, you did right by that boy. You gave him more than his own father ever did. What he does with it now is his to carry, not yours." And I held on to that, because I needed it, because I was starting to be afraid that Trent wouldn't come. That his pride, the same pride that got him into this, would keep him from the one door I'd left open. That I'd get to Monday, and it'd be just me and my recorder and a courthouse full of strangers, and I'd have won, and it would taste like ashes. He came Sunday night, a little after 9. I heard his truck in the driveway, that same 5-year-old truck, I knew the sound of it, and Marion squeezed my shoulder and went upstairs to give us the room. He stood on my porch. He didn't come in. He stood on the porch where he'd stood 100 times, holidays and Sunday dinners, and the night his daughter was born when he came to tell me first, before his own family, and I opened the door and he couldn't look at me, and he had an envelope in his hand. "I brought you everything," he said. His voice was wrecked. "Every email, every transfer, every account number, all of it. Vane, the debt, the invoices, the shell company he ran it through, it's all in here. I made copies. I'm giving the originals to the DA Monday morning." He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were a ruin. "I'm not going to fight it, Cal. Whatever happens to me, I've got it coming. I'm not going to make you drag me. And here his voice broke clean through. "I need you to know I never touched the money, not $1 of it. It all went to Vane, to pay down the debt he held over me. I know that doesn't make it better. I know forging your name is forging your name, but I couldn't let you think I did it to get rich. I did it because I was a coward who couldn't tell you I was drowning." And I looked at that man on my porch, 36 years old now, gray coming in at his temples, the boy in the torn boots so far gone I could barely find him. And I did the hardest thing I have ever done. Harder than voting day, harder than the basement, harder, God help me, than anything except the Highway 4 thing itself. I forgave him. Not out loud, not with a speech. I just stepped aside and I said, "Get in here, son. It's cold and your coffee's getting warm." And he came apart on my kitchen floor, a grown man on his knees, and I got down there with him, 62 years old and my knees screaming, and I held him the way I never got to hold Danny one last time. And that, not the recorder, not the invoice, not any of it. That was the moment I won. Not against Vane. Against the thing that had been trying to make me hard for 17 years. But I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that fixed everything. Because it didn't. Forgiveness is a thing between two men. The law is a different animal, and the law was already moving, and there were things now that even I couldn't stop and wasn't sure I wanted to. Real quick, if this story stayed with you, please hit subscribe and drop a like. It genuinely helps more than you'd think. Now let me tell you what happened Monday. Because Monday is where I thought it was over. It wasn't over. Monday at 9, I was at the county courthouse like I said I'd be, and Trent was there, true to his word, with his envelope and a lawyer he'd hired with money. He didn't have to represent himself into a guilty plea. And the DA's office took the recording, and they took the invoices, and they took Trent's whole confession and a young assistant DA. Named Jeree shook my hand and told me it was, in 20 years, one of the cleanest fraud cases anybody had ever walked into her office and handed her. Cooperating witness, documentary evidence, a recorded admission of extortion. She said Marcus Vane was going to prison. She said it plain, like a fact. And I believed her, because the evidence was overwhelming and because a man in my position wants to believe it. And for about 6 days, it looked like the story was over, and justice had won, and I could go home to Marian and my green ledger and let it be. And then, that Friday, I got a call from Ruiz, and her voice was different, and she said, "Mr. Reese, I need you to sit down. Marcus Vane is gone. He cleared out 3 accounts Wednesday night and got on a plane. We think he's out of the country. And Mr. Reese, the deed to your land, the transfer to Sterling Point?" She paused. "It went through Thursday morning. Before you ever walked into that room." Part 6. I want you to sit with that the way I had to sit with it, standing in my own kitchen with the phone against my ear and the floor tilting under me. The deed had already gone through. Thursday morning. Before I ever walked into that glass building was my recorder and my one photocopied invoice and my whole careful trap. While I sat across from Marcus Vane thinking I was holding the last door he couldn't pick, he'd already picked it. The land was gone. 12 acres and a 110,000 square foot plant, transferred to Sterling Point for $1 and other good and valuable consideration, recorded at the county the morning of, with my signature on it. My signature. Again. Forged. Again. That whole meeting, the deed sitting in the middle of the table like a body at a viewing, Vane sliding me the heavy silver pen. It was theater. A formality to paper over a thing already done. They didn't need me to sign. They'd already forged it and filed it. They just wanted me in that room, beaten and quiet, signing a clean copy so that if it ever came to a courtroom, there'd be a witnessed, notarized signature and no forgery to argue about. I hadn't sprung a trap on them. I'd walked into the last act of a play they'd already finished writing, and Vane was gone, on a plane. Out of the country, with the land, and 3 drained accounts, and a 14-month head start on everybody. I sat down at my kitchen table. Marian came and stood behind me with her hands on my shoulders and didn't say anything. And for the first time in this whole business, not on voting day, not in the basement, not on the porch with Trent, for the first time, I felt old. I felt every one of my 62 years, and I thought, he won. The smooth man in the good suit, he did exactly what he told me he'd do. He buried me, not in paper. In the one thing an old man can't buy back, time. That's where the story was supposed to end, isn't it? That's where these things usually end in real life. The careful man does everything right, and the crook gets on a plane, and there's no justice, just a lesson about how the world actually works. And I sat in that chair a good while and let myself believe it. And then I did the only thing I know how to do when the ground moves under me. I went to my records. Because here's the thing about Marcus Vane. The thing his whole floor of lawyers never understood about the old man they were so sure they'd measured. Vane thought the deed was the prize. He thought the land was the thing I was protecting. And he was so busy stealing the land that he never once asked himself why a man who bought a parcel in 1994 and leased it to his own company for $1 a year, why that man would structure it that way in the first place. I didn't do it to hide it. I did it because of the note. Let me finally tell you about the note. The index card. Trent's handwriting, 7 words on the front, a number and a date in the corner that I've carried in my wallet for 17 years and read 1,000 times and never once understood. He gave it to me in 2011. It was the day we closed on that plant expansion. The day Reese Millwork stopped being a garage outfit and became a real company. The day I signed the construction loan on the building that now sat on my land. Trent was 22 that year. Danny's age. Danny's exact age. The age he was when we lost him. And I don't think Trent ever knew. That's why I sometimes couldn't look at him straight. And after we signed, Trent handed me that index card, shy, the way a young man hands you something he means, and on the front it said, "See, you built a foundation nobody can take." And in the corner, a number, a long string of digits I always assumed was some inside joke I'd forgotten, and a date. 2011. I thought it was sweet. A kid's thank you to the man who took him in. I put it in my wallet and I carried it because it was the closest thing I had to a card from a son, and I never thought about those digits again. Until that Friday, sitting at my kitchen table with everything lost, I took it out one more time. And I finally looked at the number the way I look at everything else. Not as a sentiment, as a record. It wasn't a joke. It was an account number. Now, before I tell you what account, and I promise you it's the last turn and it's the one that flips the whole thing, if you've come this far with me and this story has meant something to you, please subscribe and give it a like. You'll never know how much a thing like that means to a man telling a story into the dark. All right, the last piece. Back in 2011, when we built that plant, I did what any careful man does with a brand new expensive building sitting on land he owns personally. I insured it. Not just any policy. I put a title insurance policy on that parcel and a separate builder's and owner's policy on the structure. And I set them up through an independent trust, funded and paid annually, that I'd created to hold and protect the real estate as separately from the company, so that no matter whatever happened to Reese Millwork, bankruptcy, lawsuit, bad court, or anything, the land and the building it stood on could never be dragged down with it. The company leased it, but a trust owned the protection on it, and the account number on that index card, the number a shy 22-year-old copied down for me the day we set it all up, because he was the one who sat with me for 3 hours filling out the paperwork, because he'd been there the whole time, that number was the trust account. Trent hadn't given me a thank you card in 2011. He'd given me the key to the one thing Marcus Vane could never steal, and neither of us knew it for 17 years. Because here's what a title insurance policy does, and here's what a floor of lawyers who steal for a living apparently forgot to check. When a property is transferred by a fraud deed, a signature the real owner never made, that transfer is void. Not voidable. Void. It never legally happened, no matter what's filed at the county. And the title insurer's entire job, the thing I'd paid a premium into every single year for 17 years, is to defend the true owner's title against exactly that. Against forgery. Against a fraudulent transfer. Marcus Vane hadn't stolen my land. He'd stolen a piece of paper that said he owned my land, and then he'd fled the country believing it. But the moment I walked that forged deed and Trent's sworn confession into the office of a title insurance company that had a 17-year, fully paid contractual obligation to defend my title, a company with its own floor of lawyers, and a very direct financial interest in not paying out a claim they could instead reverse, I wasn't a 62-year-old man alone against a crook with a head start anymore. I was a paying customer with a valid claim. And I just handed them a fraud so clean and so documented that unwinding it was cheaper for them than fighting it. They didn't just believe me, they went to war for me. Because it was their money now. To part 7. The title company's lawyers filed to void the fraudulent transfer on a Tuesday, and it was the fastest I've ever seen paper move in my life. Turns out, when a corporation with real money on the line decides a thing needs undoing, a floor of lawyers works about 100 times faster than one old man in a basement. They had Trent's sworn statement. They had the recording of Vane's own voice threatening me. They had 41 forged invoices and a title policy I'd paid into faithfully since 2011. And they had the one fact that ends every fraud case cleanly, a deed signed by a man who could prove, 6 ways from Sunday, that he'd never signed it. The transfer to Sterling Point was declared void inside of a month. Not appealed, not negotiated. Void. The land came back to me the way it had always legally been mine, because in the eyes of the law it had never left. Marcus Vane, wherever he was sunning himself, woke up one morning owning $1's worth of nothing. He'd fled the country to protect a deed that was worth less than the paper it was printed on. He'd burned every bridge, drained every account, become a fugitive from an extortion charge, all to steal something a careful man had made theft-proof 17 years before Vane ever knew his name. That's the part I keep coming back to. He didn't lose because I outsmarted him in that room. I didn't, really. He'd already beaten me in that room. The deed was already filed, I just didn't know it. He lost because of a decision I made in 1994 and a policy I paid for quietly every year without ever once expecting to need it. He lost to a version of me from 30 years ago that he never even knew to be afraid of. What goes around comes around, my father used to say. But he never told me it could take 30 years to come all the way back around. It does, sometimes. You just have to still be standing there when it does. Marcus Vane is not sunning himself anymore, by the way. I'll get to that. But first, I have to tell you what happened to Trent, because that's the part of this story that actually matters to me. The land was always going to come back. It was insured. Trent wasn't insured against anything. He kept his word at that courthouse. He pled guilty. Fraud, forgery, the whole weight of it, he didn't hide behind 1 inch of it. And here's the thing I did that some of you are going to have opinions about, and I want to hear them. I went to his sentencing. And when it was my turn, I stood up in that courtroom, the man he'd forged and robbed and betrayed, and I asked the judge for mercy. I told her the truth, as I'd come to understand it, that this was a good man cornered by a professional predator, that he'd never taken $1 for himself, that he'd walked into the DA's office of his own free will and handed them the case against himself and against Vane both, and that without his confession, Marcus Vane would have walked away clean. I told her that I had raised this man like a son and that I was not there to bury him. I was there to say he was worth saving. Because of the cooperation, and I'd like to think a little because of an old man's letter read aloud in that room, Trent got a sentence that had an end you could see from the beginning of it. Restitution he'll be paying for years. A felony he'll carry the rest of his life, but not the decade Vane would have gotten. A chance, at the far end of it, to still be a father to that little girl. That was all I wanted. That was the whole prayer. Before I bring this home, let me ask you one last thing, and this is the one I've wondered about most of all. Was I a fool to forgive him? I've had people I respect tell me to my face that a betrayal is a betrayal, that forging a man's name is a line you don't come back from, that I let sentiment make me weak. And maybe they're right. I truly want to know where you land. Tell me in the comments, did I do right by that boy, or did I let my grief for one son make me blind about another? I read every single one, and I've changed my mind about a lot of things in my life by listening. Now, Marcus Vane, what goes around? He made it about 4 months. It turns out a man who drains 3 accounts and forges a federal adjacent fraud and flees an extortion charge that's now backed by a very motivated title insurance company's legal department. That man does not get to enjoy a beach for long. The insurer, protecting its own interest, referred everything it had to the authorities. And a fugitive with a paper trail 41 invoices deep is not a hard man to build a case against. He was picked up trying to move money he no longer had a legal claim to, extradited, and he is, as I sit here telling you this, awaiting trial in a facility a great deal less comfortable than the glass building where he once leaned down and told an old man his 120 families were his responsibility now. They were. I kept them. Every last one. Not a single soul at Reese Millwork lost their job. The plant's still running on the land that was always mine, the lights are still on, and the smooth man in the good suit is going to answer for every warm, condescending word he ever said to me, because I kept the receipt on all of them, including the one with the little red light. I got my company back, too. With the fraudulent share dilution voided right alongside the deed, same forgery, same poison, same result. My 51% came home. But here's the strange thing, and it's the truest thing I know now. I don't want to run it the way I used to. I'm 62, I've built the foundation. So, I've spent this last year doing the thing I was always afraid to do, the thing that started this whole nightmare. I'm handing it down, carefully this time, in the light this time, with lawyers I chose and papers I read every page of. And I want to tell you who I'm handing a piece of it to when he comes home. Because I sat with that green ledger a long time, and I wrote one line the night of his sentencing, and the line was this: a man is the door he chooses. But sometimes he deserves a second door. Dot Trent walked into my life through a door, 19 years old in torn boots, and told me he'd outwork anybody I had. And for 17 years, until a predator found the one crack in him, he never lied to me once. I lost one son on a highway in the rain, and I could not save him. I do not intend to lose the second one to a mistake he already climbed back out of on his own 2 feet. When he's done paying what he owes, there's a place for him. Earned, not given. But there. I still carry the index card. It's in my wallet right now, next to my license, where it's written for 17 years. You built a foundation nobody can take. I used to read it as the sweetest thing anybody ever gave me. Then, for one terrible night in a basement, I wondered if it was something crueler. And in the end, it turned out to be both the sweetest thing and the most important. A boy's thank you and a founder's fortress. Hidden in the same 7 words, waiting 17 years for the one day I'd need to read it right. A note that meant nothing to anyone but me. They thought they'd taken everything from a tired old man who kept quiet and kept receipts. They never understood that the quiet was the strength, and the receipts were the fortress, and the son they tried to turn into a weapon was, at the very end, the one who handed me the key. I kept my hands clean, I kept my people working, I kept my word. And I got to keep my boy. That's the whole of it. That's what the note meant. If this story stayed with you, if you believe, like I do, that patience and a clean conscience beat a good suit and a head start every single time, then you'll want to hear the others. Tap the video on your screen right now, and I'll tell you another true-to-life story of secrets, betrayal, and the justice that finds its way home. I'll be waiting for you there.